Well, hello. It's morning. And it's me. Look at me. I'm in the big boy chair. Feels good. I've stolen it. I've snuck in. They have no idea that I'm here. No, they do. But next week, I'm coming for the pulpit. No. It's good to be with you guys this lovely morning. Um, yeah, I got a devotional for you guys. I'm also going to be in the host chair for the podcast. Tune into that on this Friday. It's going to be good. And this next Wednesday, Julie Palin sharing again. Yeah, keep tuning in, keep listening to what we have to say, and let's get into the devotional for today. So, this devotional, what I want to talk about is I want to talk about how God is always in control. And to do that, I want to share a story probably lots of you guys have heard. It's the story of Joseph. Joseph, the son of Jacob in Genesis, not Joseph, Jesus' dad. Um, so, right off the bat, kind of in that story, you hear that Joseph is Jacob's favorite son, right? He is the one that Jacob loves the most. Um, and to show that love, he gave Joseph a coat of many colors, a very nice coat. And he better not be getting Ben a nice coat. But that's got to be a real kick in the pants to the other brothers, you know? Like, look at that. My dad loves Joseph more than he loves me. And that's got to be really difficult for them to kind of figure out, you know, like how do you cope with that? But that coat that Jacob gave to Joseph is a symbol of Jacob's love for Joseph, and it also kind of becomes a point of strife between the brothers and Joseph. And then to move the relationship further between Joseph and his brothers, Joseph has some dreams. And Joseph dreams that he and his brother are binding sheaves, and the other sheaves bow down to Joseph's sheaves. And then he tells them that in his other dream, the stars and the moons bowed down to Joseph. And the brothers, they look at him and they go, "Are we surely to bow down to you? Like, really? Is that what's going to happen here?" And the brothers are clearly like, "Okay, this is Joseph, you've pushed a little too far here. We're not liking this." And it gets to the point where the brothers even plot to kill Joseph. They're like, "This isn't happening. Joseph is done. We're going to kill him." And Joseph found his brothers away from home in a field, and that is when they plotted. They say, "Here comes the dreamer. That dream. We're going to bow down to you. No way. Here he comes. Here comes the dreamer. Let's plot to kill him." But Reuben, the oldest brother, says, "Okay, wait. Let's not shed his blood. Let's not make it directly our fault. Instead of killing him, let's throw him in a pit to die." Little more indirect way of killing him, but they didn't want to directly shed his blood. So eventually Reuben convinces his brothers and says, "Okay, let's toss him in the pit." And they do just that. But as they do that, Ishmaelites come by and they go, "Hey, why don't we just sell him? Sell him as a slave." And eventually the brothers go, "Well, all right, we can totally get rid of him." And that's what they do, right? So Joseph has now gone from being his dad's favorite, right? He's number one kid, to being a slave. He had it all and he lost it all. And that's going to tend to be a very common theme through Joseph's story. So he eventually, Joseph, finds his way sold into an Egyptian's house, the name of Potiphar. And the text tells us in the Bible that God was with Joseph and he found success as a slave. And because God was with Joseph, he blessed the house of Potiphar. And it got to the point where Potiphar put Joseph in charge of everything. There's nothing Potiphar had to worry about. You know, he kicks back. Joseph's got it, you know. What a great guy. And Joseph was a great guy. He was absolutely crushing it in Potiphar's house. But then a problem comes. As problems often come in stories, Potiphar's wife started noticing Joseph. Joseph is described as a good-looking guy. Probably not as good-looking as me. Okay. He was a good-looking guy, right? And Potiphar's wife starts trying to advance on Joseph. And Joseph says, "No, I can't. Potiphar has given me everything. He's held nothing back except for you. He has not held or he has held back his wife. Am I now to go behind his back and go after the one thing he has not given to me? It's not right. And Joseph continually refused until one day when Joseph was in the house by himself, no other servants around. Potiphar's wife comes in, corners him, and again advances on him. And he flees. He knows it's a bad situation. He runs. But as he runs, she grabs his coat. And he is so anxious to get out that he runs away and leaves the coat behind. And she now has his coat in her hands, right? Not a good situation. So she comes out and she accuses him. She says, "Look, I have the coat in my hand. This Hebrew tried to advance on me." She falsely accuses him, and there's no witnesses around. So Potiphar is obviously rightfully angry at Joseph, not knowing that it's a false accusation. And Joseph gets thrown in prison. So again, there's Joseph. He's finally risen again to the top, right? There's nothing he has. Like, there's nowhere else he could go. He's head of the house, and then he loses it all. And he even made all the right decisions. He did nothing wrong, and he's lost it. An absolute roller coaster, right? And as he's in prison, again, the text tells us that God is with Joseph. And the head prison guard puts him, a prisoner, in charge of all the other prisoners. He is successful again because God is with him. And at some point, off in Egypt, well, I guess he's in Egypt, at a different place with the Pharaoh, the cupbearer, and the baker. The cupbearer would be the guy who would test the food for the Pharaoh to make sure it wasn't poisoned. So him and the baker of the Pharaoh do a wrong against the Pharaoh. They break a rule and they are thrown into prison. And they have dreams. And Joseph comes to them at some point, and he can tell that something's wrong. And he's like, "All right, boys, well, what's up? Like, what's going on? Something's not right." And they say, "Well, we had these dreams." And Joseph says, "Well, my God can interpret dreams. Let my God interpret the dreams that you had, and I will share the answers with you." And the cupbearer and baker, "Well, all right, we can do that. So the cupbearer says, in his dream, there were 3 branches coming off a vine, and those branches blossomed, and they had beautiful grapes. And they were taken off the vine and crushed and put into a cup, and the cupbearer gave that cup to the Pharaoh, who drank from it." And Joseph says, "Well, that dream, the 3 branches represents 3 days. And in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to pardon you and restore your position as the cupbearer, and you will be forgiven." And the baker's like, "Oh boy, that sounds good. Let me share my dream." So the cupbearer, not the cupbearer, the baker says, "Here's my dream. My dream, I had 3 baskets right on top of my head, stacked up. And they were filled with goods and bread and, baking goods." He's a baker. And the top basket, the one on the tip top, birds kept flying in and eating the bread and picking at it and stealing it. And Joseph said, "Well, okay, so the 3 baskets, again, represent 3 days. And in 3 days, Pharaoh is going to punish you. You will not be pardoned. You will not be forgiven." And, that's a little hard for the baker. And Joseph turns to the cupbearer and says, "When these dreams come true, as I know they will, my God is an interpreter of dreams. Please remember me. Tell the Pharaoh about me. Please." He's, "Come on, cupbearer, give me a plug. The big man upstairs." And, well, not the big man upstairs, with the Pharaoh. "Come on, man." And that's what he's asking. He's like, "Please tell the Pharaoh about me. Remember me." And in 3 days, it all comes true. The cupbearer is forgiven, and the baker is punished. He's killed. And the cupbearer forgets about Joseph. Joseph helped these people. Well, he interpreted their dreams, and he helped the cupbearer. eased their mind before the cupbearer was pardoned. And now they forget about him. He's still left in jail. Some time goes by, and then the Pharaoh has a dream, and nobody can interpret the dream, and the Pharaoh's very troubled by it. None of his interpreters have any idea what it means, and the cupbearer suddenly, wait a sec, I know a guy. And he goes, well, there's Joseph. Joseph is a man I knew in prison, and the Pharaoh's like, all right, bring him in. So now Joseph's going to the Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh explains his dream. He says he was standing by the Nile River, and 7 cows came by. They were big, plump, fattened cows, healthy cows, and they started eating the reeds. Just munching. Then, after that, comes 7 unhealthy, skinny, ugly cows. And those cows come and they devour the 7 healthy cows. That is a strange dream. I would not know how to interpret that dream, but God does, so it's all right. And Joseph explains to Pharaoh, here's what your dream means. The 7 fattened cows represent 7 years of prosperity for Egypt. You're going to have an abundance of grain, abundance of goods. It's going to be 7 years of greatness. The 7 ugly cows represent 7 years of famine. And it's a warning from God. He's saying after these 7 years of prosperity, you're going to have 7 years of hardship. And Pharaoh says, okay, well, what should we do? And Joseph suggests, he says, you need to appoint a wise person to overlook everything so they can save part of the food during the 7 years of abundance for when the famine comes. And Pharaoh thinks, he goes, well, who would be better at that than you? You interpreted the dream, Joseph. You are a wise man. God is with you. And the Pharaoh appoints Joseph as second in command. It gets to the point where Pharaoh is only above Joseph because of the throne. Joseph is the top dog in the top dog nation. He made it. He's up there, right? And the dream Pharaoh had comes to pass. The famine stretched everywhere after the 7 years of prosperity, and everyone was affected by it. But Egypt was ready because Joseph had very smartly reserved some of the food. And the famine made it all the way back to Joseph's family, to Jacob and his sons. And Jacob learns that Egypt is giving and selling grain. And he goes, okay, sons, you have to go get grain. We don't have any. So Joseph's brothers come to Egypt, where Joseph is the one who's selling grain, but they do not recognize him. They go, that's just an Egyptian. That's a top dog official. And the brothers come up to him and they bow down before him and ask for grain. Joseph ends up giving them grain and providing for their family. And at that moment is where we're going to pause the story, and I'm going to continue talking about Joseph on Friday. But right now we're going to stop and we're going to think back about the story. Because at the beginning I said I want to talk about how God is always in control, right? And now I've just told this story, and I might as well now tell you where I see that in the story. And I think the story is packed with where God is in control. So at the very beginning, Joseph is telling his brothers, I had a dream. You are going to bow down before me. And the brothers go, no way. And they say, we're not going to let this happen. So they take steps to try and prevent that, They think we're going to kill him. Okay, no, we're going to toss him in a pit. We're going to sell him. We're going to get rid of him. And those very actions that the brothers took is what ended up helping Joseph to get to the point to fulfill that dream. Their very attempt to stop God's plan helped to cause it. You then move on to Joseph in Potiphar's house. He had now lost everything. He'd gone through some hardships. He's a slave. He's the lowest you can be. But God was with him, and God blessed Potiphar's house, and God blessed Joseph. With Potiphar's wife, a new problem comes, and Joseph does the right thing. He is too righteous to let Potiphar advance on him. And Potiphar's wife is, angry about this. She wants to take what she can. And when she can't, she falsely accuses him, trying to harm him. But what she did, her accusation, she intended to harm Joseph. But that just ended up being a stepping stone to get Joseph to where he needed to be. Even though it was such a struggle for Joseph, and he probably cried out in agony, "Why is this happening to me? I've done nothing wrong." Even though it seemed like everything was against him, Potiphar's wife, falsely accusing Joseph to harm him, ended up allowing God to help him. It sent him to the prison, and the prison is where he met the cupbearer and the baker, and that's how he ended up getting to Pharaoh. So he suffered for what was doing right. He suffered for doing the right thing, but God turned that into a blessing. So when Joseph then gets in charge of all of Egypt and he's saving the grain, that very action helped him to provide for his family years and years later. I think it's about 13 years. Years and years later, as now the head official in Egypt, that helped him provide food for his own family, and it fulfilled the dream that he had at the beginning. His brothers will bow down to him, and that's exactly what happened. So Joseph fell, lost everything, and became a slave of Egypt specifically. And the commentary that I was reading described Joseph's fall into slavery in Egypt is a foreshadow of what's going to happen to the nation of Israel. That God's using this text, part of this story, to show, well, what's happening to Joseph is going to happen to all of Israel eventually. They're going to fall into slavery under this once great nation. And all throughout the story, as I talked, I said, he's up here, falls down there. He gets up again, and he falls down, gets up, and provides for his family. Every single action that he had, no matter how good or how bad, you can still see God working to get him to where he needs to be. God is with him, he succeeds. He chooses to do the right thing with Potiphar's wife. He gets punished for it, but it just helps him get to where he needs to be. God's power and control was there in Genesis, and it's still here today. Every struggle that you face, no matter how big or how small, God is in control. He is all powerful, he's all present, he's all knowing. He's in God in control all the time, and he has a plan. And I believe that there's a lesson to be taken in every step of your life. There's always more things to learn. And every time you struggle, God might be trying to teach you. He might even be trying to humble you. He has humbled me before. It's not always the best, but God's lessons are always worth learning. He might just be trying to get you to where you need to be. Struggle does not mean that God has left you. That's obvious in the story of Joseph. God was with Joseph. I read in my commentary that when the text says that God was with Joseph, and it directly states that, that's the only time in Genesis, despite all the patriarchs and all the amazing characters in Genesis, that's the only time it's directly described as God was with Joseph. God was with him. Even through all the struggles, God's still there, and God's still working his plan. And it's the same for you. You pray to God, you read his word, you will learn about him and grow. And that will help you understand so much more about what God has in store for you. He is always in control, and he is a good God. That's the devotional that I have for you guys. I hope you liked it. Come back on Wednesday, see what Julie Palin has for you. And come on Friday and have some fun with the podcast. All right, guys. I'll see ya.